Desk Talk by Gamma, keeping you connected and protected.
Welcome to Desk Talk, the essential podcast on distributed antenna systems and in-building communication. Hosted by Peter, VP of Gamma, and Philip Nicholas. This Gamma Electronics series focuses on emergency response and safety. Join us as we navigate the challenges of building effective communication systems for North America's first responders. We delve into the advancements in emergency responder radio systems and the transformative impact on new technologies. Tune in for insightful discussions aimed at increasing knowledge and awareness in the DAS field. Whether you're a professional or an enthusiast, DAS Talk is your gateway to understanding the nexus of technology, safety, and communication.
Hi guys, I'm Peter with Gamma. Welcome to DAS Talk. I've got Gil Martinez here and Dave Adams. Welcome guys, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us today. Super excited to be with you guys and to have our guest David Adams on. I'm also excited to have Gil Martinez, our co-host, with us today. So I'm going to kind of jump in right here, and because David, you are the focus of our program today. Okay, we want to know about you. We want to know about what you do. We want to know about your passions. We just want to know about everything that you're involved in because we know that you are a superstar. So that said, tell us a little bit about your background. First tell us about your background and about how you come to where you are right now.
Glad to. First of all, thank you. I'll send you a check for all those nice things you said. Started out as a hardware design engineer and worked my way into product management primarily because I wanted to know what customers really needed if I was going to design something. And I found it was very difficult. Not every sales or product marketing person is really good at understanding what does a customer really need? What is their life like? What is their pain points? So I found myself as an engineer doing more of that. I finally just gave up and said, listen, I'll become a product manager. And then probably got first into wireless cellular radio test equipment in the 90s. And again, just finding out that when we talk to people who had to maintain radio networks, install them, configure them, and keep them running, they really didn't have certain tools that they needed. You ask them a question, what do you want? They can't really always tell you. But if you say, show me what you do, can I watch you do it? You can observe pain points. You can observe things that are difficult, things that they're doing that take a lot longer than they really need to if you had the right test product, right? So that's
David, can I ask you what were some of those pain? Well, I was going to ask you what were some of those pain points too? Like I was an integrator for most of my career. So what were the integrators sharing with you? Like what were those things that were, I don't know, keeping them up at night or just making installs or deployments more difficult?
Sure. So let me jump to more recently, right? I was talking about career background, but so we have here at PCTEL primarily focused on cellular for several decades. AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, overseas, test equipment that help them measure how well their network's doing, drive test coverage, stuff like that. So I was at a trade show one day, and Jason Chambers from Day Wireless walks up to me and said, I love your stuff, but do you test P25? I was like, well, I don't think so. He says, what do you do in building? I said, oh, yeah, we do that. He says, do you do a grid test? And I'm like, maybe. I don't know what a grid test is, right? And so we went on, and essentially what happened, he said, listen, this is the way public safety, fire and police radio systems are tested in a building. You do a grid test. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, come out. And I basically spent a day with their lead engineer, their best guy at the time. And here's what happened. He walks around with a radio in his hand. I walk around with a piece of paper that has the floor plan. we stop at different spots where he's hand-drawn a grid, and we measure in each spot. And he's reading numbers off, I'm writing them down. And then after hours of that, we go back to the office and we start turning that into a Word document. And my first point was, you could do this in about 20% of the time if you had the right tool. Now, if I asked this guy, what do you need in a tool? He wouldn't necessarily be able to tell me. But by observing a lot of wasted time, they had to spend their best guys out, right, to do this time. And it's not the best use of their high-skilled guys. It's not the best use of anybody's time. So that's how we developed what is now an industry-leading public safety in-building test solution using a grid test methodology. And it's been fantastic because the first version wasn't enough. Every time I gave a version to him or all the other new customers, I go watch them and I'd be like, oh, we need to add something else. We need to improve this. We need to make this variation. We need to make these choices. And really, we're probably on our 15th version of that.
Wow.
And that's kind of what's helped us be an industry leader because we're out there. We spend our time with them, watching them, seeing how they mess it up. They take our tool and they do it wrong. I would be like, well, I got to do something to the tool to stop that, right? If you write your user interfaces correctly, you can help them avoid their pitfalls. So that's what we spend our time doing.
So let me ask you, how long ago was that conversation you had with Jason? How many years ago?
Well, it was either 6 or 7 years ago this summer. And
wow. So you think within those 6 or 7 years, I mean, you guys have really done a lot to help the industry. You know, if you're having, 15 different, versions or whatever, that's amazing. That's incredible.
Yeah. So, let me think of a couple of the, I'll give you an illustration of something new we're adding this year. The people who go out and test buildings, most of the time they're going to fail. My guess would be 70 to 80% of buildings do not have adequate performance for police and fire. If a police, fire, EMS walks in the building, tries to use their radio, won't work. So that's what our equipment does. It assesses the building, shows you where it works well enough, where it doesn't. And so the next step, obviously, is fixing it. You got to fix it. So you'll put in what's called an in-building enhancement system. In the public safety world, we call this ERCES, Emergency Radio Communication Enhancement System. That's a mouthful. All right, so you got to put one of those in. Now, what we focused on for the longest time is, does the building work without a system? If it doesn't, you put one in, and then we go ahead and retest again they'll test again with our tool. Oh, good, it works. We fixed it. We're done. But as part of that process, when you put one of those systems in most cases in the public safety world, if you're using like P25, you'll put in a bidirectional amplifier, BDA. This is where
quick, David,
lots of good. Yeah.
David, can you explain to maybe some of the listeners what P25 means? Because I don't think everybody knows.
Sure. So most people in America have a cell phone and you're using 4G or you're using 5G, and 4G is called LTE, right? And before that, there was wideband CDMA. So P25 is just one different way that radios can work. So instead of using cell phones that use LTE or 4G from AT&T, they use a network using the P25 technology. That's just a technology name. So in other words,
it's a tech
if
term
you ever
in the
go
industry.
if you go into McDonald's and there's a police guy with a radio on his hip, that may be an older analog or it may be a newer P25. But most counties and cities in the country, in the U.S. today, have some kind of network they've put out. And the most common one today to put in, if you're modernizing, would be P25. So anyway, when you need to enhance a building, you need to put an enhancement system in. They're going to use a bidirectional amplifier. All sorts of cables and antennas and power supplies and all this kind of stuff. It's quite complicated. It's complicated to design it, to install it, and to ensure that it works correctly. So one part of that is you go do the grid coverage tests. Okay, every place works in the building now, but that is not enough. There are all sorts of tests you need to do what they call commissioning your BDA. You're setting it up, you're making sure it was done right. There's all sorts of ways to screw it up. There's all sorts of problems that a BDA can cause. So you may fix the coverage problem.
Give me an example. So I'm a building owner, right? I had an integrator put this one in, and then all of a sudden it's coming back. Some tests were done, and what are some of the ways that it can get screwed up? Is it the guys putting it in screwing it up, or what's going on?
Two examples. There's this problem that is a lot like audio feedback. We've probably all been around a sound system where somebody holds the microphone and points it at the speaker, and all of a sudden all our ears hear this screeching sound. And really what happened was it goes in the microphone, gets amplified, goes out the speaker, and goes through that circle 1 million times a second. That's called feedback, right?
Yeah.
Well, the same thing happens with RF radio signals. If you don't put your BDA in correctly, all the stuff that you send out through the building and it's working can leak out the window, go right back up to the roof, come back in the rooftop antenna, and create that circle.
What's that called?
And as soon as, that's called, it'll cause oscillation. The thing you measure is isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Are you isolated? Is the input from the real world isolated from what leaked out of the building? You better have enough isolation or you will have a problem. Now, here's what's really bad. It doesn't just make the building stop working. When you don't have proper isolation and that happens, you disturb the whole network. So everybody in blocks around, within the mile around, their radios will stop working too.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible. Network. That's a disaster.
It is terrible.
That is a disaster.
So here you said a building needs some help. You fixed it. That's good. But what you did is made the world worse.
Oh no.
So it's critical. Yeah. It's critical you do an isolation test. Right? You should test for you must. If you put a BDA
so what you're saying is you can do your grid testing and everything can seem like it's working just fine on your grid testing, but when you do your isolation, you can have this oscillation happen or this sort of feedback that you're talking about.
Yes.
And it's like it's just railroading the networks and the radios everywhere else. Maybe you have your what? What are some of the common things that they do? Turn the power on the BDA up too high? Is that what they do, or what?
Yeah, there are some when you put a BDA with a distributed antenna DAS system in, there's design criteria. So if you design it correctly, you probably won't have the problem. But just to be sure, you should test. Right? So anybody who makes BDAs and trains people to put BDAs in, they'll train you to do an isolation test. Here's a second example. That same signal leaking out the building, not only can it feed back, but it can disturb the outdoor network on the sidewalk. So let's say you go up to the sidewalk in your police car, your radio's working fine, you're using the radio site, everything's good. All of a sudden the BDA turns on, the leakage comes out, and it interferes with your use on the street. So everything can be fine, driving around the building, there's an emergency, somebody goes in the building, starts using their radio, the BDA turns on, and all of a sudden the people on the street, their radios don't work anymore. So let's say you had a big incident, big fire, emergency, they roll up in their trucks, everything's working, they go in the building and start using their radios, BDA turns on, signals leak out of the building, and it disturbs the outdoor usage of their radios. Very common if you don't design it right and then test it to make sure you didn't create that problem at the end. So we call that a leakage test. Is it leaking out? Or you could call it a dominance test. the outdoor network's got to be a lot stronger than what's leaking out so it doesn't get messed up, right? So what I was going toward is, so we made this coverage test, the grid test, and we realized by watching people that it's very difficult to do these isolation and leakage tests correctly. So coming up here in February, we'll be releasing an addition to our product that can help you do those BDA commissioning tests. Isolation and leakage are two of them.
Oh, wow. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's
Very
great.
cool.
David, I wanted to ask you, well, you know, like you're talking about product managers, and I feel like as OEMs, there's a big responsibility for us, especially in our industry, to make sure, our first responders are safe, just the general public is safe. So I appreciate the fact that, as a product manager, you're really spending time, like you had mentioned, a wireless and different integrators, but have you guys also been in contact, like with the authorities having jurisdiction, the AHJs, to see kind of what they want or what they're requesting or what have you?
Sure. So I'll go back in history a bit for a second. It kind of shows some of their concerns. So we started creating this new product for Day Wireless. They used it a couple times. We're getting ready to have our first version. So I get a chance to go meet with the fire marshals in Harris County, Texas. Now, if you know Houston, you know Harris County. If you do, you know, it is one of the largest suburban metro kind of, from a population point of view. Harris County is also one of the leaders in doing good radio systems for fire and police. Been doing it some of the longest, do it well. So I got a chance to meet with the fire marshals there. So in this world, it's the fire marshal who looks at your grid test, says the radios work well enough in that building, and they also check the fire alarms and sprinklers and all that other stuff. And they basically say, you have permission to use the building. You have an occupancy permit. But part of that is, does the radio system work? If it doesn't, you're not getting your permit. If you put that in-building system in, you fixed it, okay, now you can have your permit. So anyway, so I was meeting with these guys and I was talking to them about, what is their life like when people are doing testing of buildings? What is one of your biggest pain points? Because again, I'm trying to use that to shape the product. The product is not just for the testers, but it's for the people who have to look at the results and make use of them.
No, absolutely.
The building
Absolutely.
People, right? So I'm asking him, I said, what's your biggest pain point? And he said, I have about 20 different companies that test in Harris County. Again, we're going back 6 or 7 years, right? He says that every time they hand me a document, a report of the test, it's different. I can't compare them. I can't look at one from company A to B to C to D to J and tell whether they're doing the same thing or if it means the same thing. It's really hard for me to assess the results that these, and he says, and the problem is a lot of people aren't doing it right. They're not doing it thorough. There are even people who cheat. Who'll turn in false.
Yeah, I've come across a lot of that over the years. Yeah.
He says, I don't have a standard. I need a standard report that has everything I need, that is produced reliably, that can't be fudged, all this kind of stuff, so that when I look at tests, 100 a year from 20 different companies, I can quickly and easily tell this building should be passed or it shouldn't be. So that's one of the things we focused on. I mean, our first 2 or 3 releases, it was just improving the report. And so now it's gotten to where, pretty much everywhere I go and talk to an AHJ or radio system, hey, I've seen your report. Oh, yeah, I love it. In fact, many places, they don't want to say you must use PCTEL. You don't want to be preferential to a vendor. That's fine. But they'll hand people our report and say, it's got to look like this when you get done. You test however you can. But at the end, it should look like this. And what that's done is driven standardization. And that really, it drives the confidence that jurisdictions, fire marshals, radio systems, it drives their confidence that when they get test results, they can trust them, they can understand them, they know what to look for, They know whether to reject it for this reason or that, tell them to go back and fix it, or yes, I approve it. And I'm confident that when my guys go out, fire, police, EMS show up, they'll be able to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, are you seeing across all the different, say, testing OEMs like PCTEL, kind of across different OEMs, is there a standardization going on, or is everybody kind of mimicking, say, what PCTEL's put together?
Well, I don't want to necessarily speak too much on behalf of my competitors. There are a few out there who have gotten grid test tools. We do look a lot alike. I'll say it that way. And really, when we talk about the grid test that we develop, we base that on fire and building code. And this is, again, something that's very different from commercial cellular world. There's nobody governing how AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile test. They test how they want to. But again, to try to help this problem we talked about, fire codes, there's model codes like NFPA and IFC. They get adopted locally, change sometimes a little bit, but essentially pretty much everywhere in the country is using a description of this is the way you test. You take each floor, you draw a grid, you make one measurement per area. All of that was described in code. And in fact, it goes all the way back to a standard from TIA. TIA is a big standards organization. TSB 88 is the standard. So how to do a grid test, there's some variations, but essentially all we did is implement what code tend to talk about. Now, code's changing, it's getting better, it's evolving, they're clarifying, making improvements, and we've been going right along with it. In fact, what we realize is we should get involved with organizations like Safer Buildings Coalition, and they make contributions to the code writing committees. So NFPA, IFC, we help make recommendations. If you want your test descriptions to be better, change it this way, change it that way. And so really we're kind of doing this in parallel. We're helping the industry develop best practices for testing, while we're also kind of keeping our product up to date to implement all those things. And now I'm trying to remember the question you asked that I'm answering. But essentially,
well, just in terms of standardization, like if you're seeing, standardization across, say PCTEL and your competitors. So that's essentially what I was asking.
Well, yeah. So for instance, you take your grid test and you have 20 different areas in your grid on a floor. You're supposed to go to each area. You're supposed to make a measurement that's statistically reliable that you can grade. Is it good enough or not? Well, the grading technique should be the same in every grid test tool. The technique where you stand in the middle of the area like it tells you to, that, if you're doing something different from that, then your grid test tool really isn't code compliant, right? And so you should make it code compliant. Now, I'm no expert on my competitors, but I do know for us, we try to be very particular that we've implemented TIA best practices, fire and building code standards, that we do it the way it's supposed to be done. And that's really critical. So if someone's looking at our tool compared to others, those are the kind of things you should look for. Are you doing it the way this is written down? And that's, it puts some restrictions on what you can do, but it also gives you guidance as what to do in a product. And that's what we try to do.
Yeah, no, and I can really appreciate that because, having been an integrator too, and an OEM, it's kind of the Wild West out there in some areas of the country, where the code is there, but how are they enforcing it? How are they interpreting it? If they're making amendments to it. So as the industry is maturing, hopefully we'll see a little bit of that more, like you're saying, kind of standardization in a way, but the specifics, like this is how we want testing done. Design, like you're saying, best practices, design practices, what
Sure.
is going to be, make everybody's life maybe a little easier. I think it's always going to be a challenge, but, in terms of what the AHJs are requiring, in terms of, how the integrators are to perform, and even, the three of us as OEMs, what is it that we can do to help that process to go, smoother and better, and to get better information, better data, really.
So if I could jump in here real quick, and I think maybe this is something we can kind of hit on real quick. We talk about best practices for integrators, right? Are there best practices that an authority having jurisdiction might want to consider adopting?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Let me throw out 3 of my favorites.
Okay. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. I'll throw out 3 of my favorites. First, and the code says this, that as a jurisdiction, you need to provide information that is needed by the integrators. If you want a grid test done a certain way, you better spell that out. You need to tell them where your radio sites are. If you're going to put a BDA in, you're going to have to, point to a certain radio site. Well, where are they? What channels do you use? So this is it sounds like a no-brainer. I can't do what you want me to do unless you tell me what you want me to do, right? That's kindergarten 101. And the code says you should do it. But you'd be surprised how many jurisdictions that's still a struggle. Integrators who go in to test a building and they want to know what frequencies to test. So who do I call? It's not on a website. Well, I'm not sure. Bob tells you to call Jill. Jill tells you to call Sam. I mean, look it up on this site. Well, that's not accurate. So a best practice is do as good a job as you can documenting the answers to the important questions so they don't have to bother you. And they don't do it wrong. Okay, that's one. Another one is the jurisdictions are divided into 2 worlds. You have fire marshals who are concerned that the building is safe. You got to have good radio communications everywhere. That's safe. This other aspect where does the BDA mess up the outdoor network? That's not so much the concern of the fire marshals. Of course, no fire marshal wants that. But really that's the concern of the radio system manager. He's the one that's got to make sure the network works outside. And as part of that, when you have a radio system, you got a license from the FCC. So that radio system has licenses. We call them the licensee. As a licensee running a network, it's your job that no BDA causes isolation or leakage problems. That's your job. A fire marshal cannot say the BDA works well enough. I looked at the isolation and leakage test. It's okay to turn it on. Fire marshals are not allowed to tell you to turn a BDA on. Not legally, not FCC. The only person who can do that, licensee, or all the radio shop people that work for him, or whoever, right? So now if you work on a building, you've got to get the fire marshal to look at the grid test. It's good enough. You got to get the radio shop to look at your BDA test. You're not going to mess my network up. And both need to give you approvals. The jurisdiction needs to give you your occupancy permit. The radio shop licensee gives you the authority to turn on your BDA. It's called a retransmission agreement. So a best practice is do not confuse those, right? I mean, it's okay for the fire marshal to ask the radio shop to help him look at a grid test. That's okay. But in the end, the fire marshal owns responsibility that the indoor radio works. And the only person who can tell you to turn a BDA on is the licensee in the radio shop. That's another best practice. That's
are there ever
really
moments
messed up in a lot of places.
Are there ever times where you run into it where those 2 people are one and the same? So the frequency holder is the fire marshal? I'm just asking.
No.
That doesn't happen.
I don't think I've...
Not even in small jurisdictions or anything like that?
No. It's
Okay.
really different.
All right.
So let's say you need a radio network in your city or county. You're not going to hire a fire expert to go plan that stuff out. You're going to go find a radio person. And he's going to be the one that applies to the FCC and gets the licenses. He's the licensee. He's got to hire some engineers, design the network, deploy it, run it. That's like a totally, I mean, you're going to be up at the very top of a city or county government before those two people report to the same place. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Now, ideally they know each other. Ideally, they work together. Ideally, they depend on one another. If you want to make sure your indoor radio system works well and you got good coverage, as a fire marshal, you're not a radio expert. If you're smart, you're going to go ask the radio people to help you look at the reports, right? You should work close together.
Yeah.
And again, as the radio system manager, you're not responsible that stuff works in the building. You want it to work in the building because you want the police guys and the fire people to be safe. So you're going to help out the fire marshal, right? So, but it's definitely very two distinct roles, expertise, knowledge, organizational. It's usually, no, I'm not saying there isn't out there. I just never met one. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And let me ask you, David, like we were talking about the best practices for the AHJs. Do you see that improving as in terms of communication and all those things getting to the integrators, or is it stagnant?
Yes.
Or what's your view on that?
No, it's improving by leaps and bounds, but we're still on the 10 or 20 yard line. We got a long ways to go to get a touchdown. But yeah,
Gotcha.
we're not on safety, right? We're not pushed all the way back across our goal line, but we got a long ways to go. But it is improving. I mentioned Safer Buildings Coalition. I know Gamma's a member as well. I see Peter at a lot of these events. But that's what they do. Their whole goal, their whole mission is to educate integrators, educate fire marshals, educate radio systems. Pretty much everything I'm saying to you, you would hear in an SBC session or something similar. Yeah.
Agreed. Absolutely.
I'm curious, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that we face in this industry right now?
You guys have alluded to it, so have I. It's an ever-increasing number of jurisdictions that improve the quality of their process. There's just a lot of places where fire marshals are still telling people to turn BDAs on even though they're not supposed to. You still have a lot of places where people are only testing. We haven't talked about this topic, but historically, people always said, just test the power, the number of bars on your cell phone, right? That kind of a measurement. Is there enough power? No ARF engineer would have ever told you that's enough. But it took a while for code officials and then the fire and building code to realize they should be measuring signal quality as well. So they started doing that by doing a voice test called a DAQ, delivered audio quality, two people talk. And if it sounds good, you pass. Well, that was much better. But over time, you realize, well, that's got some challenges and limitations. So let's measure a quantity called signal to noise ratio, SINR. It's what my dad used to do broadcast TV in the 50s, right? Your signal has got to have a good quality. It doesn't matter how strong it is if it's been interrupted, interfered with, it's got a lot of noise. It doesn't matter how strong it is, it ain't going to work. So really, over time, that's gotten into the code. More and more jurisdictions are asking for it or expecting it or demanding it. So, if you want to really be sure people are safe, having good radio coverage in the building, you should be assessing quality, not just power. So this is a trend that's increasing. So every year goes by, I know of more and more jurisdictions that are requiring a signal quality test, not just a power test. But you'd be surprised. There's a lot of places. I'll ask my customers, so did you do a SINR test for them? Nah, they don't want it. They don't even want to see it.
Oh, man.
Even if you just did it extra for them and just showed it to them, they don't want it. They don't want to see it. Or you can show it to them and they'll say, that's fine, but I don't want to use it. I'm not going to use my pass-fail. It's only going to be based on power. I would estimate that somewhere around 50% or more of the tests that are done in the country are power only still. Now, you go back 7 years, it was 100%. So we've moved a long ways,
it's
right?
true.
We moved a long ways, but that ain't good. And of course, there's all the places that don't require building testing yet. Yeah, so that's not in that 50%. That makes it even worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again,
I was talking,
more people being educated, doing the right thing. Go ahead, Peter.
So basically trying to help communicate, because like I've done this for about 2 years now in this industry, and I kind of take a step back, and I talked to a lot of people. I was going to the SBC events, including AHJs, including OEMs and stuff like that, and I'm like, wow, this is a lot to unpack, right? I mean, because you've got a lot of work that needs to get done, an enormous amount of work, right? What I mean by that, an enormous amount of building that needs to get done. When you talk about, you can call them green buildings, the new ones, we're doing a pretty good job at getting them, to where we need to be, right? To communications inside. Then you've got brown buildings, which, are older buildings, which are not. That's a whole nother world, right? And some jurisdictions are starting to force on that. Right, but then we've got this great big disconnect, and the disconnect seems to be sort of the running theme is not knowing what's expected of me, and when I want to do this. And then you also need more integrators to come in, because we have more work that needs to get done in newer regions that are starting to require this kind of thing. So it seems like there's some stumbling blocks of what I've seen come into the industry, and I'm hoping to try to help bridge some of these gaps, right? So your message that you send, like for your example, these best practices to AHJs and frequency holders on what they should be doing, maybe they're not up to par in the tech that they need, to accomplish that. Maybe they don't know how to use it, or maybe maybe they don't have the budget to buy the right equipment to do the testing, so but if we can get that message to them and help communicate that with them and saying, hey, maybe this isn't so expensive, or hey, you know what, your old power testing isn't the way we want to do it, and there are better ways to do it, to sort of help get that message out. I think that's really important.
Yeah, we're singing off the same hymnal here. And really, that's what we focus on. There's this principle about designing products that the simpler you can make it seem to do it, and the more complicated it is under the covers, the better it is, right? Mm-hmm. So really, if you, the people try to go out and do this manually, it's very complicated. But what we've tried to do is make it relatively accessible. So generally speaking, you would think you would take an engineer or a technician, a radio person, to go out and do these tests. We've made it so you can do an accurate, reliable, correct test, and you don't need to have an engineering degree or even a technician degree.
That's fantastic.
If someone wants to assess those results, you may need an engineer to make sure you did it right. And that's what we always recommend. But we've enabled more people to do the test correctly. Same thing with this BDA commissioning test we've added. That's much more skilled requirement, right? A much higher skill requirement. And though they're, of the probably, we've got more than 2,000 people we've trained to do a grid test. But I'd say less than 5% or have the skill level to do a BDA test, the isolation, the leakage. So again, we've tried to, let's make a tool so that the guys who do know what they're doing can supervise people to go out and more easily do it, can tell if they did it correctly. So again, you have more people who are now able to do some of these BDA commissioning tests. We don't ever tell you you're a BDA commissioner. That's not our job. But if you're being supervised by someone who knows how to commission a BDA, you can execute some of the tests and do it in a way that it's easy to tell you did it right, and you can tell if the results are good or not. Right? So that's really our focus to help the industry, is to make it more accessible by a larger number of people. so we can get the work done.
Fantastic. That sounds great. So we're coming to a close here of our program. I just got a question for you, David. What are your guys' plans? What's your plans for 2024? What are you going to be doing over the next year?
So, and it kind of goes back to one of the questions you raised. We've spent a lot of our earliest years with the testers, the integrators, the services companies, the people who take our product and do the testing. Over time, what we realized is we need to spend more and more time with the fire marshal, AHJ side of life, and the radio system side of life, and helping them develop the processes. So in other words, if I want all my reports to look the same, what do I need to write up? What document do I need to give the test companies to say, however you're doing it, whatever tool you use, PCTEL or not, I want your test done this way, I want your results documented that way, and I want to be able to see it in a common format. So we're spending a lot, I personally last year and even more this year, will spend more of my time working with jurisdictions, fire marshal side and radio side, to help improve their processes. I'll give you one more example. A new product we've brought out recently, last year or so. If you want the radio system to work, it better work coming into you. That better be good. They call that the downlink. But what you talk and send back to the network better be good too. That's the uplink. So ideally, you test the downlink, but you should be testing the uplink. Now, voice test helps with that. We've made a new solution you can put at radio sites. That at the same time as you're walking through a building, you're making sure the downlink signal into the building is good. You can push a radio button and we'll measure signal quality on the uplink. SINAR, BER on the uplink. So we're spending a lot of time with radio systems. Some have already bought it and put it in. We expect a lot more people to be doing this. So now you have the best possible test. Every spot in the building, you know it works in and you know it works out. And a good test because you're doing SINAR signal quality. So that's what we're doing this year, is helping the radio systems and the fire marshals. Yeah.
Very, very cool. So where can if people want to reach out to you and learn more about what you've been doing, how could they get a hold of you? What's the best way to catch you? Is it on LinkedIn? Is it on social media? What's a good way to get a hold of you?
So certainly we got PCTEL.com. You can go find all about the products, ask for contacts, salespeople to follow up. I personally am on LinkedIn, David Adams, PCTEL, LinkedIn. You can find me pretty easily. I'll try to respond pretty quick if someone sends a message that way. Yeah, see us at SBC events. SBC will be having like 27 seminars across the country. Go to saferbuildings.com, and you'll see about those. We'll be at about 12 or 13 of those this year. You can find us there. We'll be in Miami in a couple of weeks on the 31st. So if you're in Florida, awesome. Come on down. You can find us that way.
Great. I'll see you in Florida because I'm gonna be there this year. So I'll see you in Miami.
Miami's a good one. Florida is one of the leaders of thinking about this, adopting it, enforcing it. For a couple of years, over half our test kits were being sold in Florida every year for a couple of years. Yeah.
That's incredible.
I think, I personally think that of all the tests done with our kits, the ones done in Florida are probably 20% of them or something like that. And a huge disproportionate amount. Safe. If you want to be safe, live in a safe building, go move to Florida.
Head to Florida.
Well,
that's right.
Do it down there. With all those hurricanes, they need it, man. I mean, they got a lot of stuff going on there. I mean, from the Gulf, from the Atlantic, they're kind of dealing with a lot going on down there. So
don't get me wrong. I know of a lot of good AHJs across the country, a lot of good radio systems, but some of the best I know are right there in Florida. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And again, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, David. Thank you, Gil, for being with us today. Much appreciated it. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Yeah, I enjoy it. You can tell. Peter, we'll see you in Miami.
Okay.
DAS Talk by Gamma, keeping you connected and protected.